episode 186 of the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. We speak to alignment expert Art Johnson, and he's going to tell you why ensuring your organization is fully aligned will help it achieve your peak performance. Are you ready for this one? All right, let's do it. Welcome one, welcome all to the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast, a weekly podcast series dedicated to helping you hit peak performance across the three domains of leadership. Those being leading yourself, leading your team, and leading your organization. This podcast couples my 20 years of military experience as a senior Canadian Army officer with world-class guests to bring you the most complete podcast of leadership going. And for more, feel free to check out our website at movingforwardleadership.com. And with that, let's get to the show. Yes, hey everyone, it is your Chief Leadership Officer, Scott McCarthy. It's so great to be back. Yes, back. If you're listening in real time, you probably realized that I had a little bit of a break in regular schedule. So, unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but I do this as on the side, right? This is not my full-time business, but rather a side hustle for me. And work got super busy, and unfortunately, I was away for 2 weeks and just couldn't get the episodes pre-recorded and ready to roll in time before I went away on my trip. So, needless to say, I decided to not stress myself out, to lead myself, and rather deliver quantity. I went with quality, and knowing I wouldn't be able to edit them properly and make sure everything was good to go, I said, shag it. I'm just going to delay for 2 weeks. So, hence why, if you're listening real time, this episode was delayed by 2 weeks. My apologies, but life happens, right? So anyway, today we are talking about alignment and making sure that you and your organization are aligned, and importantly, the people in your organization. So with that, I brought on Art Johnson. Art is the CEO of Organamics and works with clients across the United States. He's got a long history with large corporations, places like IBM, US West, CenturyLink, Medtronic, and a whole bunch of other large corporations. He's also serves as a professor with Hamline University School of Business and teaching their MBA candidates in strategic management. And during this episode, Art and I talk about different topics such as how culture helps us achieve alignment, his 9 pillars of cultural alignment, where organizations become most aligned most often. That is a crucial one because that's something you want to avoid, right? Why humility is so important, how to use empowerment effectively, and a whole whack of other topics. Art is a scholar. He's a gentleman. He's a great speaker. And you know what? You're going to enjoy this one tremendously. Got a lot out of this one, especially the whole cultural aspect and I love thinking about the culture of my organization and how I'm setting it up. So anyway, that's it for me. Why don't you sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with Art Johnson all about the art of alignment. All right, my man, welcome to the show. So good to have you here today.
Scott, thank you for having me.
So we're talking about your book, The Art of Alignment. And right out of the gates, I want to know, how is proper alignment going to help the leaders out there to be able to push, their teams and their organizations to those peak levels, hitting peak performance? So let's start there and then dive into the nitty-gritty details of it all.
So that's a great question. I think all leaders are trying to figure out how do we get maximum performance from our organizations, and we look to processes and things like Lean Sigma and Six Sigma, and unfortunately, if we have a culture that rebuffs those sort of uh, attempts to drive real efficiency, we can't get that lift that we're looking for. So it's important that we have our culture aligned around our mission, vision, but particularly this idea of really looking at continuous improvement has to be a part of that culture in order for things like Lean Sigma, Six Sigma to actually work.
You're speak my lingo. I love some of those words that you're talking about. Culture, and then God, I'm having a complete brain fart here right now. You said one other thing there that I was like, yes, obviously that's not showing right now because I can't even remember what it was. But anyway, let's dive into that whole culture bit, and how important is alignment within culture specifically, and then let's carry on with how do we get our organization aligned culturally towards where we want to go.
So, Scott, think of alignment as the strength of harmony between strategy, structure, and culture. We spend a ton of time on strategy, making sure that, hey, look, we've defined where it is, the direction that we're going. And our structure is one that many times we inherit, or over time we begin to experience this thing called cronyism. So we've got people in boxes that probably shouldn't be there, but we've all been a part or seen organizations like that. But the thing that many times gets glossed over is this concept of culture. And all three of these things have to kind of come together in a crescendo effect to ultimately drive the performance that we're looking for. So when we talk about culture, there are 9 pillars of alignment that we specifically get at in the book. And it's imperative that we spend time understanding each one, that we're taking the time to make sure that each one is fully imbued in the ideologies of the organization. And then the outcome is something really special. And we've been measuring organizational alignment for a really long time. And what we found is probably no secret to you that the more aligned an organization is, the better it performs. So how do we get to work on these things and ultimately drive the kind of performance that we all seek?
No, that's awesome. I love how you talk about that. Those 3 aspects coming together because they're so important. And you're right. Like those organizations that we see, there's often that's the 1 or 2 that are just not really lined up with the other ones, and we're like, okay, what's going on here? You're talking about having a culture of this, but all of your actions that you're doing, all your policies and all this, expectations and all this stuff does not line up to the expectation of that culture you're talking about. Like, oh, you say we're here to take care of our people first, but then you expect them to work like dogs. You give them absolutely no time off. Your benefits are crap. Your workplace has a toxic environment to it and all this stuff. But you say, oh, our cultures revolve around our people. Like, how's that aligned? It doesn't.
So you know the world in which I play.
Oh yeah, don't worry. I'm in there too, right? I'm in there too. So it's our world. I feel your pain, but that's why it keeps people like you and I employed and doing great things like this podcast, right? So let's dive into some of those 9 pillars. Like obviously we'd be here all night if we hit all 9, but let's cherry pick a couple there. So what do you cherry pick a couple of those pillars that you feel like are the ones where you get the best bang for the buck for the leaders out there who are listening to this episode right now?
God, I got to be careful. I can actually hit all 9 in a reasonable amount of time, and the only reason why I don't want to compromise any one of them, because each organization is different. When we go through the process of measurement, we measure all 9 of them, and we quickly figure out which one is the one to spend more time and attention on. And so, if you don't mind, maybe I'll just kind of tick through them real quick. It'll take me 5.
Yeah, hey man, yeah, your show, you do it.
And then the ones you want me to take a deeper dive in, I'd be happy to. So you let me know which ones you think would be more appropriate for the audience. But I'll just say this to you. First off, it starts with the mission and vision. Are we clear on what the mission and vision is? I spoke at the university at Villanova, and it was a graduate school class of 44 students. And I just asked, I said, I'll give you this $100 bill to anyone that can recite the mission of their organization. And I'm not kidding you. Only 2 attempted it. And these are middle managers and above, right? So these are people that should definitely espouse the mission and vision. And 2 attempted it, and only 1 got close. So nobody got it. So I got to keep the 100, which was, I guess, a good thing. But in the same token, though, it just shows you that not always does the organization fully understand the mission and vision of the organization. So that's where communication comes in, which is kind of that second pillar in the book, The Art of Alignment. That's the book I wrote specifically on this, and it gets at, all right, each and every one of these 9 pillars independently. We measure them independently, and what we find is that organizations that are able to communicate vertically, right, but it's got to be bidirectional, and at the same time horizontally. So our departments talking to one another so that we're making smooth, crisp handoffs. And so these are the elements of communication. Then teamwork is this concept of, do we work well together as a team? Where are the areas that we're not necessarily cohesive, and what sorts of things might we do a little bit differently, particularly in that space? The fourth is empowerment. And how do we push decision making down? We make better, faster, typically smarter decisions as we do that, but it requires some trust in the organization, but it also fosters this concept of risk taking. And so if we can create an environment where people can take some risks and leverage their creativity and bring that full person to the job, we get a lot better performance. But without accountability, which is the 5th pillar, it's kind of tough to have empowerment because, it's tough to have accountability without empowerment, because in essence, if you do, you're running a paramilitary organization. And so it's really critical that if you're going to have people be accountable, that they ultimately own what it is that you're asking them to go do. Otherwise, they're just doing what you say. And it's hard to hold them accountable to that, because if it fails, then who ultimately is responsible? And also at the same time, the recognition program doesn't necessarily have the same impact, because again, if I tell you what to do and you do it and then I recognize you for it, who am I really recognizing? So we have to be careful of those elements. The 6th one is this idea of development. Are we giving people the tools necessary to be effective in what it is that we're asking them to go do? And then also, are we helping them round their resume so that if we have to fire them because of some sort of downsizing, that they can land on their feet? So many people are having that kind of relationship with their employer, saying, I'll give you my best work, but kind of help me too. I want to know that you've got my back as well. And not everybody's able to say that, but certainly their work reflects it. The 7th one is creativity. Are we finding creative ways of getting our work done? Do we have ways to capture creative ideas? Do we have ways by which we can imbue these ideas within the organization? Number 8 is best practices. Do we look outside of our work to find better ways of doing what it is we do? Or do we think that everything that we do must be homegrown because we have the best and the brightest? And I can tell you, I had that experience at IBM. We felt like that back in the mid 80s, and it became costly. And then last but not least is this idea of leadership. Scott, you know what? I mean, people leave organizations because of failed management, and oftentimes, or most times, and leaders have to be authentic. We've got to be able to trust what they say. We got to have confidence in direction of where they're trying to take the organization. They've got to be able to walk the talk. So we measure every one of these elements independently, and collectively, all of them kind of come together, what we call the orgometric score, which defines the alignment of an overall organization.
Yeah, I can see why you're a bit apprehensive of just cherry picking, because they kind of build on each other, right? One leads into the next, which leads into the next, so on and so forth, until you hit the end all be all, which is leadership, which is why we're here. But the thing that I probably like the most about what you just talked about was right at the beginning, where every organization's situation is different, and I find so many leaders out there are like looking for these different frameworks, like you have this framework, and they're like, all right, I got to use this framework. But what they don't fail to understand is you got to use it as an overlay. You have to look at it through the lens of your organization, your situation, not necessarily exactly the same as the other organization, or how when the way you've written the book exactly word for word. You have to understand from your context how this fits. And that's basically what I heard from you right at the get-go. And I really wanted to emphasize that point, because leaders out there, do not try to slam that square peg through the round hole. You're shaving off things that you need. Figure out where your square peg, your square hole is with this.
That is spot on. You absolutely have to figure out, as an organization, what is our, where do we stand relative to our mission? Is that mission consistent with what it is we espouse to be as an organization? Does our strategic plan, align with that mission? Do our performance evaluations, as we go to evaluate employees' performance within the organization, are those things reflecting what it is that we expect related to direction of where we're trying to go? And then last but not least, how about the development plans? So as we're trying to get better at what we do, are we honing in on things that are ultimately going to help us realize that mission? And so all aspects of this thing have to be thought of in a continuum. So as we go through the process after we've created the strategic plan, and now we're going to allocate resources, but we've said directionally where we're trying to go as an organization, those resources need to be allocated in a way that's consistent with that. And so we've got to be thinking about all aspects of this as we walk down that path.
Now, from your experience, where do you find organizations get misaligned most commonly?
Misaligned, you say?
Yeah.
So many times this idea of the leader being the oracle of information, and so everybody's got to check with the leader, whether it's the CEO or some director, or it doesn't matter. But if that leader has positioned himself as the oracle of information, and sometimes it's for ego purposes, sometimes they see it as a way to preserve their job. But either way, unfortunately, what ends up happening is it stifles creativity. Because if I have to continually go back to the leader of the organization to get something done, it's a slow process. But two, that would suggest that all good ideas come from one individual. And so we really kill creativity with that. And we ultimately kill empowerment, which is, you talk about sapping the energy from an organization. Reduce that, as that empowerment score goes down, you sap the energy of the organization. So it's imperative that leaders spend time and attention on the concept of pushing decision making down and giving people the leeway to make the right choice.
It's such old school mentality, right? The leader that has all the answers. That's the way it was before. But guess what? Times have changed. And I often talk about on the show how leaders no longer need answers. But reality is we need to be the ones asking the questions. And we have teams upon teams of specialists who are the ones with the answers. And I love all the basically repercussions that you mentioned about when the leader holds all that decision making and all that quote unquote knowledge and power at their level, and how it stifles empowerment, stifles creativity, leads to increased micromanagement, which ultimately leads to what? Increased turnover. And you can tell when an organization's not doing well, what do they have? There's one metric that stands above all the rest all the time. What's that? High turnover. People are just going right through the door constantly because they're like.
So when I talk to leaders, Scott, you're right on. I talk to leaders all the time, and the first thing I'm trying to find out is, are they that oracle of information? And then I encourage them to, if they're trying to really solve it and fix that, there's a couple quick solutions. Number one, read the book Zap, The Lightning of Empowerment. It's a short read. It's a great way of getting at that. The other is to spend some time, pouring through the information related to empowerment in my book, The Art of Alignment. But then this other concept that my father taught me a very, very long time ago is to ask effective questions. And so I can remember as a kid, going out cutting the lawn and coming back after I'm done, say, Dad, I'm done. As typically he's going to come out and inspect the work. He takes a look and we both can see a spot that I missed. And he looks at me and says, Art, is this your best work? Again, an effective question, right? Is this your best work? And I looked at that and I said, no, and fired up the lawnmower and got back out there and finished off that piece that I missed. But then the question he asked right after that was what caused me to really get after it was, when do you think we'll see your best work? Now think about what that does, right? Is this your best work? No. But then the question is, well, you live here. This is your house. Two, when do you think we'll see your best work? And if that's not inspiring, I don't know what is. So what I've learned from that was leaders ask effective questions. So I took that with me to several jobs. In my last post at Medtronic, I'll never forget, I had employees coming to me asking me, hey, Art, can I do this, that, the other thing? And my comment was, I don't know, Bob, can you? Tell me, as you're lamenting over what to do here, what are some of the best ideas you've come up with? And then he would list out the ideas. And then I'd say, well, which one do you like the best? And then I'd say, well, what's keeping you from implementing? Is there anything I can do to help you? Do you see how not only did I push decision making down, which fosters creativity and more ideas than just the ideas in my head, but now we get a chance to hold somebody accountable. And trust me, they're going to see to it that best work is brought to that particular initiative. But then when he does the work or she does the work and accomplishes what they've set out to do, when you recognize them, it's truly genuine. And now we get that opportunity to rinse and repeat throughout the entire organization. But that leader has to stop answering questions. And the fastest way to tell is, are you answering more questions? Or are you asking more questions? And those questions should be effective questions.
Wow, absolutely love those examples. One from your father. Ironically, less than 2 hours ago, I was actually mowing my lawn. So timely example with your dad. But I love, the example that you gave personally, as a leader, as a supervisor, when you said, "I don't know, can you?" And at the end of that, what I felt was, you know what, you shifted ownership of, one, the problem, but two, most importantly, the solution space of it to the individual. And like, when people take ownership of things, that's when the magic happens, right? That's when people get really fired up. That's when you see their best work come alive, because now, especially in this scenario where they're coming forward like, hey, can I do this? And you push that ownership back on them, they're coming with something that they're interested in, that they're passionate about, and then you put the ownership on them to get after it. Oh man, that's where magic happens, right?
You are exactly right. We measure this thing, as you know, called alignment, but as we break it down, we look at how messaging is cascaded. So for instance, we talk about our strategic plan. What we're finding is that those leaders that sit around the CEO, generally between 70 and 75% of them are aligned, which means that 25 to 30 are not. And misalignment begets misalignment. So as those individuals go and cascade the message to the broader organizations, unfortunately, it breeds more misalignment. And by the time you get to the individual contributor level, we're in the teens in terms of alignment. So it becomes critical to get that leadership team not only aligned around mission and vision, but we also have to make sure that they have the tools necessary to be able to cascade the message effectively. In other words, not everybody is good at cascading that message. So we either have to help them do it with it, or we got to find somebody else, and that's a structural issue.
Communication and messaging is so important, and often find it's the first fault, right? The first point of failure at when things go astray. So from your standpoint now, what are some great aspects of messaging and communication to ensure that, one, people understand it, but two, it's aligned with everything that you have going on throughout your organization?
Well, Scott, great question. You go back to the old adage, you got two aspects of messaging. It's encoding and decoding. Have we encoded the message properly, but has it been received as well? So in other words, has it been decoded? Is it clear on what it is that individual's been asked to go do? But then the other thing that we want to pay particular attention to is communication truly bidirectional. So in other words, am I just pushing decisions down and only communicating downward? Or do I have adequate feedback loops so that I can figure out, all right, do we need to course correct? What things do we need to be doing differently? What things are happening in the macro environment and micro environment that we may not necessarily be aware of at the leadership level? But if we've always had all the answers, again, that oracle of information, and just push everything down, we're not getting real good feedback. And by the way, that is extremely toxic when it comes to dealing with customers. So we have to have bidirectional communication.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I often talk about the need for communicate, not in the way that you communicate, but rather how your audience, maybe that's one person, maybe that's 50, understand. Because that is how you need to be, that's that decoding aspect, right? Of people understanding what you're actually trying to say. And if you say something to one person and you say it to someone else, they'll have two complete different interpretations of what you said. So you have to speak to them in the way that they understand. And that took me a while to understand as a leader. It took a few podcast interviews to really understand that and the importance of that. But now as I grow and start leading bigger teams and stuff like this, like I realize how important that is, because end of the day, what I find is that whenever I'm let down, whenever something goes sideways, whenever I don't get exactly what I'm looking for, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, I start with myself. And I find 95% of the time, guess who's to blame?
Yeah, yeah, you. But though, that's the thing that we, I think the next book I write is going to be called, I don't know if there may be one out like, is Get Over Yourself. And I just think that, leaders, we get caught up in, we've got this title now, we've got this fancy office, we've got support around us, and, we've arrived kind of thing. And actually, it's the opposite. Now is when you've got to go to work on getting out of the way of the organization, but focusing on getting the rocks out of the road and figuring out how to open up the communication lines both directions and taking feedback and getting better at yourself at effectively leading and communicating, and then charging your leaders to go do the same thing. And it's just, there are a handful of folks that I've seen that have really mastered this, and I can just tell you that those organizations run in a pristine kind of way, Scott. And I've been a part of a couple of them, and that was the impetus to writing The Art of Alignment.
It boils down to humility, right? And essentially, I like that. Get over yourself, because it's true. It's so true. It's like we work hard. Oh, I've made it. I'm here. I'm the man, the woman, whatever. I'm in charge. I'm the boss. It's all about me now. Then quickly you realize, like, it ain't about you whatsoever. It's about everybody else. It's about the organization. And I like what you pointed out there of getting the rocks out of the road. So I don't know if you followed up on my personal background, but I'm still serving senior Canadian Army officer, and I commanded a squadron of 200 members for 2 years. I used to tell them constantly, like, my job is to ensure you have all the tools, all the resources required to do your job on my behalf. That is it. That is what I'm here for. And remove those rocks out of the way. They need training. I'm going to find you training. You need a new piece of equipment. I'm going to find you a new piece of equipment. You need more time to do your work. I'm going to find a way to optimize the time, or drop a task, or reallocate, do something, that's my role in this job.
Scott, do you take the time to make sure that the individuals that report to you have the opportunity to dissent?
To descend?
Yeah, dissent. In other words, do they get a chance to say, hey, look, this is what I'm having a problem with. This is what I don't like. This is what I think would be more effective. Do you give them an opportunity to do that?
Oh, hell yeah. Absolutely. In fact, so I really like your empowerment. I'm huge about empowerment and delegation, stuff like this. So the squadron that I led was divided up in three different troops, we call them, and they're very distinct. One was a transportation troop, i.e., trucks, buses, equipment, stuff like this. Another one was a supply troop, i.e., holding different stocks, materials, doing contracts, and all this stuff. And the third one was a maintenance, fixing things. Very distinct, very different. And each one of those had a troop commander and another junior officer. And I told them, I said, listen, I said, if you have a problem that resides only in your troop, that is your problem. So transport, if you have a task, a transportation task that you need to move something from point A to point B, that is your problem. Now, if you don't have the resources, or a problem spills into another troop, i.e., for example, let's say transport had a task to move a piece of equipment. However, the equipment they needed to use to move that piece of equipment was in maintenance. And maintenance was saying, well, it's not a priority for us. Now it's my problem, right? Because I'm the one that can control maintenance priorities. I'm like, well, you know what, maintenance? No, we're going to lift that one up on the priority scale so that it gets done, so we can go transport can complete their task. So that's how I looked at it, and that's how I empowered my guys and girls to go about their day and lead their troops, because at the end of the day, I'm more worried about the strategic view down the road. What's coming ahead next week, next month, next year, all this other things. I got people who can worry about the day to day.
I got you. No, I like it. Get those rocks out of the road, my man.
Get them out of the way. So no, and goes back to humility and being humble enough to say, I'm not the one that's going to make every single decision, and trust and empowering people. So I really want to get your stance, because we've kind of danced around empowerment here, and I know it's a key part of your book. So let's dive deeper into it from your standpoint about empowerment and how to do that effectively, so that we don't stifle that creativity, we don't stifle, we make it.
Well, the fastest the fastest way to find out whether or not you are an empowering type leader is are you asking more questions, or do you find yourself answering more? And if you're answering more, then you are not an empowering leader. And so it's important that we get to the point where we're just asking more questions, and that those questions are provocative, and that we're encouraging decision making, and we're encouraging a degree of risk taking, so that we can stretch as an organization and find those better ways of doing what it is that we set out to go do. But we never get a chance to do that if everybody's following rote and verse what it is that I'm spewing. So as a leader, I've got to step back and again get over myself and begin to ask those effective questions. Is there a better way to do this? Have you talked to anyone else about that? What did they say? Did any of that make sense to you? What did you decide to do with that? Did you share it with your peers? All these things that begin to foster this idea of where are we getting our ideas from, and what are we doing with those ideas when we get them? And then how do we manifest these ideas into something that lead to positive outcome? And as leaders, we got to get really good at that. But it begins with that whole idea of communication. So empowerment requires a great degree of communication. And as you said before, as you notice, every one of these 9 pillars that I keep talking about, they tie together. And the beauty of it is, Scott, is that it creates this wonderful crescendo and leads to outstanding performance. What we're also learning is this. I mentioned this fact that a more aligned organization performs better, but these pillars become leading indicators. So in other words, there was a school district, I'll never forget it, a very large school district, in fact. Obviously this works in corporate America, and we've been doing that forever and ever. But in schools, K through 12, what we found was that as the accountability score goes up by 1 point, it translates into a 29% decrease in chronic absenteeism. In other words, as teachers and administrators and leaders within a school district feel more accountable, that leads to more buns in seats. And when you have more buns in seats, you can teach. And when you can teach more kids learn, and your graduation rates go up, your test scores get better, all these wonderful things happen. So this leading indicator around accountability helps us get there. And now if we can unpack the 3 or 4 questions that we're asking in our survey, now each and every one of them becomes an actionable kind of thing to drive the outcomes that we're after. So that's where this thing gets really interesting from a longitudinal perspective.
That's super interesting, that whole school example. That's not one I was expecting to come out from this conversation, but it just shows the power of it.
But Scott, real quick, the reason why I brought that up is because I wanted to show the versatility of alignment. It's not just in corporate, it's not just in law enforcement, it's everywhere we walk and go. the more aligned we are around our mission and vision, the more apt we are to perform at the highest level.
Now, you've mentioned mission and vision. We talked about it a little bit at the beginning. You mentioned it again. Would you see that as the foundation of your process then?
So I would say that if we're trying to establish where due north is, some organizations, it's their mission and vision. Other organizations, it's our values. Other organizations, it's our strategic plan. In law enforcement, I mean, we see the mission right on the side of law enforcement vehicles, right? Protect and serve. So it just depends on the organization. But whatever it is, they'll define what it is that they want to charge people to. And then at that point in time, all we're trying to do is figure out the degree to which people have bought into that.
Got it. Got it. So I guess my point would be, it behooves the organization make sure that's right before you even start this, right?
Right.
You know what I mean? If you got a structure that's built on a faulty foundation, you can get it up, but at some point it's going to crumble.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a children's story that talks about that.
Yeah, one or two, or someone falling off a wall. But that's what I mean. Like you need to take that time, do that, deep soul searching, deep thinking analysis. Like, okay, what is it that we want to point our people towards? Is it a mission and vision statement? Which honestly, it's getting a lot of flack these days. I feel like a lot of people are saying, "Well, it's archaic, old school." Really, does it work for a small company? Vision and vision statements. Okay, well, values. Okay, values, but values mean something different. Then you go on to the next thing. Or is it a motto? Like you said, police, serve and protect. Which is interesting. You bring that one up because I wouldn't say it hits home, but I feel there's a lot of angst, against police officers and police forces out there these days, especially on your side of the border. And for a guy who knows a fair number of police officers as friends, I feel that the times that these little spikes occur and these instances occur because they get away from that motto, which is serve and protect. You're there to serve and protect the public. And that could mean a whole lot of different things in all kinds of different situations. But ultimately, it's about serving and protecting, which arguably is the same thing as myself as a forces member, right? To serve and protect. So,
right. And you hit the nail right on the head, Scott. I mean, it is. And that's when we see these incidences take place that lead to craziness. What we find is, you're right, there is a departure from the mission or the vision of the organization. And there's one element missing. It's to serve and protect all. It's everybody. We protect all. And when we get away from that, so as you might imagine, the lower the ergometric score, which is what we're measuring here, the more likely an organization is to some sort of calamity. And so it's just a matter of getting that baseline read of where the organization sits, and then trying to drive that score up, because we know that it leads to positive things, but more importantly, it leads to mitigating some really negative things as well.
No, for sure. And I think that's probably the biggest thing there is like, okay, first let's fix the house before it crumbles. Now let's make the house, outstanding. Let's run out the inside. Make sure the structure and the foundation's great. Okay. I get, identify and fix those problem areas. But now how do we optimize? How do we make it even better? Right. And right. And that's what we're going after in the latter parts. So with that, obviously, like you said, you go through this assessment and you punch out different scores. So obviously, the lowest is the ones that are faltering faltering the most. The higher ones, not so much, etc. What advice out there would you give for the leaders who are listening and say and go through this? How to prioritize the work when they go, oh my God, I'm misaligned in so many areas. Where do I start?
So first, you start with measuring where you are, right? In other words, we get a baseline read of where the organization is, and then what we'll find is that these 9 pillars, some will spike and be doing well, and others will be in the lower scores, and we have to identify and be okay with that. And I think it takes a courageous leader to be okay with getting that piece of information that potentially you can see where you're falling a little short. So once we identify that area that we're falling a little short, then the next step is to find a good consultant to work with the organization, or find someone within that can kind of lead the charge in terms of how to rectify the situation. And that's not what we do. We stay squarely in that space of measurement. But then after the work has been done, in other words, the break fix work that has helped get communication lines open and establishing better processes and whatnot, to come back and measure again and to say, all right, what has moved? Did our accountability score go up? Did our creativity score go up? And what we'll find, and oftentimes find, is as that creativity score goes up, so does innovation. In other words, newer ideas are coming up faster, better ideas are coming up, new product launches are happening, wonderful things happen from a manufacturing perspective in that space. But the same thing happens in other industries as well. We find better ways to teach. We find better ways to connect with students in education. In law enforcement, we find better ways to work in communities that we have historically had challenges in. And so how do we get better at what it is that we do? It all begins with this concept of getting a measurement, fixing it, and then coming back, measuring again, and seeing where that improvement was, and then tying that to an outcome. So in other words, chronic absenteeism, like the example I used before, being tied to accountability, we look for this thing called, and I'm going to get really technical here for 1 second, we look for a thing called a Cronbach score. And the higher that Cronbach score is, speaks to the degree to which those two events correlate. And the more they correlate, the more you can spend time on accountability, knowing that it's going to drive the outcome that you want. And so now that we've got this leading indicator, we need to revamp our strategic plan to reflect the things that are ultimately going to get us to our end goal.
That's awesome. Two things really stood out to me there. One, which you said earlier, was essentially for leaders to acknowledge and accept the fact that you can't be perfect and you can't fix everything right away. And often out there, I find leaders, we're like, oh, we got to fix it all, or, we got to have everything perfect. Well, guess what? Nothing's perfect. There will be problems. There will always be problems. However, is this acceptable at this moment in time? And that's something which I found, which is you don't find from someone like yourself saying that all the time, because you're there, you call a spade, you're selling your service, you're selling your book and all this stuff. But at the same time, in order to be effective, you have to be realistic, and to be realistic, you have to accept where the areas where you can fix right now and where the areas you're okay with waiting, because you can go ahead and, as you pointed out later, some of them may be attached to other areas where you're not happy with. So, by de facto, that area where you accept it where it is right now may go up anyway, just due to a secondary effect of what you're fixing elsewhere. Or you may go through the whole process, relook at it, go, okay, this is the progress that we made. Okay, these areas have gone up substantially. Oh, that one area where we said we would accept where it is. All right, now let's focus at that now and go after that one next, because that is now the focus where we need to get better. Maybe that one is innovation, maybe that's creativity, maybe it's retention or empowerment, who knows. But
so Scott, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say that you mentioned that we're out here to sell books, and I am a born again capitalist, so the idea of moving more books is great. I mean, we're a Wall Street Journal bestseller. I mean, so we can check that box. The business that we do, we've done well in the space of measurement, working with organizations. That box is checked. What we're really trying to do is we're trying to level the playing field. We're trying to create an environment by which a leader that steps into a role can be effective immediately.
Right.
And how do they go about doing that? And so what manifesto do you turn to as a new leader that helps you say, all right, how do I get everybody on the same page, at the same time? Because we've all been a part of organizations, whether it's sports, whether it's military. No, because my dad was a drill sergeant in the Army, so I know that rote and verse as well. But how do we? It happens in performing in an orchestra. If you've ever heard the bolero performed, that is alignment at its best. And so, as we see hockey, I see you've got the Canadians mug there. And so, I'm from a hockey state myself, and it's important that we are aligned and that but you see when a play takes place, and it's almost like it's in slow motion as it happens, and it's this this synchronicity that takes place, and it's just a wonderful thing. But how do we capture that and make it happen time after time in our work environment? So it requires creating the right kind of culture. And historically, we've thought of these things like measuring teamwork and measuring empowerment as soft skills that you can't really measure them. But that's not true, because we have been able to measure them. And the degree to which we get better at those things leads to the outcomes that we're after. And so that part is what gets me excited. I think we've gotten to a point now where, we've told the story enough to get the word out. Now it's just a matter of really driving these opportunities and using the normative data that we've been able to amass over the years in a manner that continues to help leaders.
Wow. Powerful words. Basically, what you were saying is, here to help.
Yeah.
Here to help.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely.
I just think about myself as a young leader, Scott.
Oh, yeah.
And, you're scratching your head trying to figure out, all right, well, now how do I get these people that have been in this business longer than me? How do I get them to fly in formation?
Absolutely.
How do I do that? And that's what this is.
Absolutely. What a great way to wrap up. Yeah, definitely a great wrap up. Man, it's been a great conversation. But before we do hit stop on that record button, I got a couple last questions for you. And the first one being a question I ask all the guests here at the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. As according to you, Art Johnson, what makes a great leader?
A leader that can get out of their own way. A leader that asks more questions than answers questions, and empowers the organization to make informed decisions.
I'm feeling that book coming. I can feel it coming. Get out of my way, or out of my own way. Love it.
Get over yourself.
Get over yourself. That's right. Get over yourself. I can feel it coming. I'm sure you're like typing it up before me or something. Final question of the podcast. Where can people find you? How can they follow you? Shameless plugs. Have at it. It's all about you right now.
So The Art of Alignment can be purchased wherever you get your books, Barnes and Noble. You can certainly get it at Amazon. We're an Amazon bestseller, Wall Street Journal bestseller. The best way to reach us in terms of measuring organizational alignment or becoming a part of the ecosystem of alignment is orgametrics.net. That's ORGAMETRICS.net. And then just one other shameless plug here, as you call it, Scott. We've been measuring this thing called diversity, equity, and inclusion. And what we've learned is that individuals that are misaligned many times are people that feel disenfranchised for whatever reason. And the degree to which you can get all birds, planes flying in formation, you get better outcomes. And so the degree to which we can find ways to get everybody on the same page, that drives the behaviors and the outcomes that we ultimately want as leaders. So we've been measuring that now for some time and have had a lot of success in that space as well. And that tool is called Equimetrics, EQUIMETRICS. EQUIMETRICS.net.
Awesome. And for the listeners, always, it's easy for you. Just head to movingforwardleadership.com/186. All right, my man, it's been an honor, sir. It's been a pleasure. It's been a great conversation, to be honest. Thanks for coming down. And that's a wrap for this episode, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening. thank you for supporting the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. But you know what you could do to truly support the podcast? And no, that's not leaving a rating and review. It's simply helping a friend. And that is helping a friend by sharing this episode with them if you think this would resonate with them and help them elevate their performance level, whether that's within themselves, their teams, or their organization. So do that. Help me, help a friend, win-win all around. And hey, you look like a great friend at the same time. So just hit that little share button on your app, and then feel free to fire this episode to anyone that you feel would benefit from it. Finally, there's always more. There's always more lessons around being the highest performing leader that you can possibly be, whether that's for yourself, your team, or your organization. So why don't you subscribe? Subscribe to the show via movingforwardleadership.com/subscribe. And until next time, lead, don't boss, and thanks for coming out. Take care now.